Good morning, everybody. This is our Going Deeper follow-up live stream where we take something that we talked about Sunday during service and we go a little deeper with it. So yesterday, the message was called We Can Beat This. It was part 2 of a 2-part series talking about trials and temptations. Yesterday, the topic was temptation, how to beat it, how to overcome it. We all face it. It's all something we have to deal with, so how do we overcome it? One of the things that I did is that I read, there's a passage in James chapter 1 that deals with this, and I read a couple of the verses out of this interlinear Bible. If you don't have one, they're really cool. What they do is they take the actual Greek, I don't know if you can see it, the actual word-for-word Greek, original Greek, as it was written in Greek thousands of years ago, and translate it word for word into English. And then they the grammar's a little off, so they flip it around, the words around, so that it makes sense to us grammatically. I read a couple verses out of the interlinear. I want to do that right now. Chapter 1, verse, 14 and 15 of James? Yeah. So it says this, "But each one is tempted by his lusts, having been drawn out and having been seduced by them. Then, being conceived, lust brings forth sin, and sin, being fully formed, brings forth death." The idea is this. Even though we're followers of Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus, you still have a sin nature that's hooked to you, that follows you around, that's part of your life here on earth, right? Your spirit is transformed when you give your life to Jesus, born again, made new, but you still have what the New Testament calls the flesh, or the sinful nature. And so there's this tug of war, right? Your spirit wants to go toward the things of Jesus. Your flesh wants to go toward the lusts of this world. And there's a battle. And every once in a while, no matter who we are, no matter how mature we are in Jesus, that flesh is going to rise up and try to draw us out. The words that are used here are when they are drawn out. We're tempted when we are drawn out by our own lusts, right? And so the idea is like this. So you're drawn out. James says, your lusts, they pull on you, and they try to tempt you, and they get you all wanting to do something that is against the nature, character of God. And then what happens where it gets dangerous is when you sort of give heed to that pulling, right? You turn your heart toward that pulling, right? And once you turn your heart toward that pulling, James says that's when that thought, that lust is conceived, right? It drops down into your heart, and the next step is only a step away till you actually are doing it. And then sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death, right? It always brings destruction. And what we talked about yesterday is the fact that the battle is won or lost between that point where your flesh starts to pull you in a direction. There's something against the will, nature, character, word of God that is pulling on you. At that point, when the pulling begins, is when it's won or lost. Because at that point, we get to decide whether to turn our heart toward that thing and let it get conceived in our heart, right? To give it attention and thought and to begin imagining and thinking about it. Or we can make the decision to turn our hearts away from that toward Jesus, right? And that is usually where the battle with temptation is won or lost. Because once you turn your heart toward those desires or lusts that are pulling on you, you've pretty much lost the battle, right? And so we really zeroed in on that, right? That's the point. As soon as that pull comes, that's the point where you respond and turn toward Jesus. And then we looked in James chapter 4, I think it's verse 7, where James says to submit to God and then resist the devil and he will flee from you, right? We all know that, when temptation comes, it's good to resist it, right? Rather than to give in. But the point that I brought about yesterday and that I want to throw at you today is that resisting is not enough. Because anytime you take something away, you take something out of your life, you've got to replace it with something else. You can't just leave that void there. For instance, if someone, all they eat is junk food, let's say, and you take away the junk food, which is unhealthy for them, but you don't replace it with healthy food, what's going to happen? If you just take away the junk food, well, they're going to get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier until eventually they just go full board back to the junk food and eat more of it than they would have normally, right? So if you take the junk food away, you have to replace it with good food so that you're filling in that void, right? You're replacing it with something else. Same thing with temptation, right? And I gave some pretty real examples. We try to be real around here at Deeper Waters. Maybe some uncomfortable examples, but for instance, I was talking to the guys and I'm like, look, guys, if you're feeling tempted to pull up your phone and look at that PORN, right? And like if you're tempted to look at that and that lust is pulling on you, yeah, you got to resist it. Turn the phone off and set it down, but you then need to replace it with something else, because if you don't replace it, your mind's just going to keep going back there, right? So I said, put the phone down, walk across the room, give your wifey a little kiss on the cheek, and start actively engaging, tell her how beautiful she is, and start engaging in a real human-to-human relationship, right? Engage in that relationship that's there. I said, if you're a teenager, or you're not married and you have that same temptation, it's drawing you and you want to look. Yes, resist, turn it off, put it down, but you have to replace it with something. And I said, go outside and go for a run or go to the gym. Do something that's going to give you that endorphin high that you would be looking for in that stupid screen, right? Offer that time to God and make that worship, that workout an act of worship and say, Lord, I am offering this hour of my life to you, right? I gave an example for the ladies, like, if you're at work and you feel tempted to flirt with your boss or a coworker, right? They're real nice to you and you have that temptation. Yes, resist it. Walk away from there, get out of there, but you have to replace that with something else. And I said, pick up your phone and text your husband something that you appreciate about him. Right? Even if you have to dig a little deep, find something and make that act, right? When you resist the devil, you resist doing what is against the character of God. You got to replace it with something that God would want you to do. If you feel tempted to gossip, right? Yes, resist the gossiping, but you got to replace it with something God would want you to do. So replace it with speaking kindly to or about that person, right? Instead of gossiping, replace it with good stuff that would lift them up or build them up. There's all kinds of examples, right? If you are tempted in the moment to lash out at your spouse and go off the handle and yell at them, and stop, resist that, walk away, catch your breath, count to 10, get your cool. But replace it with something God would want you to do. Come back, and maybe all you can muster is just to give them a hug and then walk away. But replace it with something that God would want you to do. That's something we don't think about a lot. We talk a lot about resisting, but we miss out on one of the best safeguards against giving into temptation when we don't replace what we're resisting with something good. That's what I want you to think about this week. Have you ever thought about that? What are your thoughts on that? I'd like to see your comments below. Have you ever thought about replacing as part of resisting? And if so, what examples do you have? What are some examples that you can come up with? All right. So anyway, with that, I love you guys. Have a wonderful week. And I'm going to close a little different today. I'm trying to think up a tagline that I can use every time I sign off. Okay, I don't know if I've landed on one yet, but I had this phrase that I said a couple years ago, and it stuck with me. I thought about this one day. I thought, when you pray without ceasing, there's no such thing as wasted time. I think I was like sitting in traffic, or I was standing in the line at the grocery store or something, and I thought, you know what? When you pray without ceasing, there's no such thing as wasted time. I'm going to try that. Maybe that'll be my tagline. So, I love you. Have a great week. And remember, here comes the tagline. When you pray without ceasing, there's no such thing as wasted time.